On paper, these islands look like tropical paradise, palm trees, blue water, and luxury resorts for the world's elite. But behind the postcards and private jets, inside quiet law offices and sealed digital vaults, sit the stolen billions of the world's most powerful leaders. Money that never passed through public budgets. Wealth that vanished before anyone could ask questions. While nations struggle with debt, inflation, and broken systems, these tiny islands quietly guard fortunes large enough to feed entire countries. And the people who hide their money there are not criminals hiding in the shadows. They are presidents, prime ministers, royalty, generals, and billionaires, people who make laws during the day and escape them at night. This is not a story about tax tricks. This is a story about power learning how to disappear. In the next few minutes, you're going to travel through a world most people never see. A world where money moves faster than justice, where secrecy is sold like a luxury product, and where the rules are written not to protect nations, but to protect thieves. You'll see how tiny islands with almost no resources became vaults for global corruption. You'll follow the invisible pipelines that carry stolen wealth across borders without leaving fingerprints. You'll discover why the most aggressive anti-corruption speeches often come from the same systems that quietly allow corruption to survive. And by the end, the question will no longer be who is hiding money. The question will be, why is this system still allowed to exist at all? For most people, corruption feels distant. It sounds like a political word that belongs to some far-off country, some dictator on the evening news, some scandal that fades after a few days of outrage. But the truth is far more personal than that. Every hidden dollar has a public cost. Every offshore account built with stolen money leaves behind an unfunded hospital, a broken school, a delayed disaster response, a family pushed deeper into poverty. Tax havens are not just financial tools, they are weapons used against ordinary people. They allow leaders to steal without seeing the faces of those they hurt. They turn public trust into private wealth. And they transform entire nations into extraction zones, where money flows upward and silence flows downward. Tonight, this investigation is not about numbers on a spreadsheet. It's about how a global system was built to protect the powerful, punish the powerless, and quietly move the world's wealth out of reach. And once you understand how it works, you will never hear the word corruption the same way again. Tiny dots in the ocean, small populations, no factories, no massive industries, no farmland feeding millions, and yet, these islands quietly control more money than most of the world's largest economies combined. Places most people could never find on a map became the vaults of global corruption, not because they are powerful, but because they are useful. The word tax haven sounds harmless, even clever, like a smart financial shortcut, but in reality it describes something far darker. These islands did not become wealthy by producing anything of value. They became wealthy by selling invisibility. They sell secrecy. They sell silence, and they sell it to the richest and most powerful people on Earth. In these places, you don't need to prove where your money came from. You don't need to explain who really owns it. You don't even need to show your face. With the right paperwork, money appears as if from nowhere, and once it arrives, it becomes untouchable. No tax authority knocking, no investigator digging, no citizen ever knowing. At street level, these islands look peaceful. Quiet banks, law offices with polished glass doors, calm streets where nothing seems to happen. But behind those doors, trillions of dollars sit inside digital accounts that do not belong to the people officially named on paper. The real owners remain hidden behind layers of shell companies, nominee directors, and legal smokescreens so thick they might as well be walls. What makes the system so dangerous is not just its secrecy, it's its legitimacy. These havens operate under international law. They sign treaties. They attend global financial meetings. They promise cooperation while quietly maintaining the very loopholes that attract stolen wealth. On the surface, everything appears legal. Underneath, it is the safest hiding place money has ever had. And here is the part that should make your blood run cold. These islands didn't become tax havens by accident. Their laws were shaped deliberately. Written carefully to attract foreign money without asking difficult questions. Designed to protect capital, not citizens. Created not for fairness, but for protection of wealth at any cost. This is where corruption stops being clumsy. This is where theft becomes precise. This is where stolen billions don't just hide, they settle in, grow interest, and wait patiently for their owners to return without consequences. And as long as these islands exist as financial sanctuaries, the powerful will always have somewhere to run. When the heat rises, when protests erupt, when governments collapse, the money is already gone. And once the money is gone, justice rarely follows. When power meets fear, money always looks for silence. For the world's leaders, hiding wealth offshore is not about luxury yachts or private islands. It is about survival. Survival from exposure. Survival from prosecution. Survival from the moment the public finally asks, where did all the money go? A politician can rise to power on promises of reform, but power itself creates enemies, rivals, investigators, whistleblowers, former allies who turn into threats overnight. Every decision becomes a potential scandal. Every signature becomes a future court case. In that environment, dirty money is not just profit, it is risk, and risk demands an escape plan. Offshore accounts are that escape plan. For corrupt leaders, the process usually begins long before the first dollar is stolen, before the bribe, before the embezzlement. Before the public theft, the exit route is prepared in advance. Companies are registered in distant jurisdictions. Trusts are created in names that mean nothing. Bank accounts are opened through intermediaries who never ask questions. By the time the crime happens, the safe already exists. Why not hide the money at home? Because home is where the laws can eventually change. Home is where political tides shift. Home is where one election can turn yesterday's untouchable ruler into tomorrow's defendant. Domestic banks are forced to answer questions. Domestic courts can issue warrants. Domestic journalists can investigate. Offshore systems exist specifically to make sure those doors stay closed. There is also fear of visibility. At home, wealth is seen. Properties are noticed. Spending raises suspicion. Offshore, wealth becomes invisible. It stops being tied to a person and becomes tied to a structure. A company that owns another company that owns another company. With each layer, the owner disappears further into the fog. And then there is control. Offshore money gives leaders leverage over their own future. If a regime collapses, the money remains. If sanctions hit, the money survives. If exile becomes necessary, the money is already waiting. It is insurance against consequence. But the darkest motivation is certainty. These leaders do not hide money because they plan to be caught. They hide money because they plan to keep stealing. Offshore systems send a dangerous psychological message. You can take more. You will be protected. Once someone realizes their wealth is already safe beyond the reach of law, the final restraints collapse. This is how corruption accelerates, not through desperation, but through confidence. And somewhere along the way, public money stops being public. It becomes a private reserve hidden across oceans, protected by legal paper, guarded by silence, and disconnected completely from the people it was taken from. These fortunes don't vanish by accident. They are professionally erased. Behind every hidden empire is an entire shadow industry that most people will never see. Not gangs, not hackers, not suitcase smugglers, but polished lawyers, private bankers, corporate service providers, and accountants operating out of glass towers in the world's most respected financial centers. Their job is not to steal the money. Their job is to make sure no one ever proves who stole it. On paper, everything looks clean. A company is formed in one jurisdiction. Its owner is listed as another company in a second jurisdiction. That second company is owned by a trust in a third jurisdiction. And the trust is managed by a law firm that is legally forbidden to reveal its clients. With every layer, the trail grows colder. Not because it is illegal to follow it, but because it is legally blocked. This is how real ownership disappears. The person benefiting from the money is no longer the person connected to the money. The connection is cut by design, and when investigators arrive, they don't find a thief, they find a maze. Nominee directors sign documents for companies they do not control. Mailbox offices host thousands of businesses that have no employees and no actual operations. Bank compliance forms are filled out by intermediaries who swear everything checks out, and it all functions under the protection of law. The most dangerous part of the system is that it feels respectable. These are not back alley operations. These are firms that advertise their services openly. Asset protection, wealth management, tax optimization. The language is clean. The result is silence. And when journalists or prosecutors finally break through one layer, they are told the trail stops there. They are forced into international legal requests that take years. By the time paperwork arrives, the money has already moved. Again and again and again. This is not a flaw in the system. This is the system. The people who build these structures know exactly who they are serving. They know the money often comes from public budgets, bribes, stolen aid, or extracted resources. But they also know something else. They know that once the money is hidden well enough, the original crime becomes irrelevant. The wealth survives even if the nation collapses. In this world, corruption doesn't need to hide in the dark. It hides in contracts, in clauses, in jurisdictions, in legal signatures that transform dirty money into protected capital. By the time the public realizes what's happening, the wealth is no longer connected to a human being. It becomes untouchable. And that is when financial crime stops being theft and becomes infrastructure. Ordinary people go to prison for theft. Powerful people receive immunity. Once money disappears offshore, a second shield activates: political protection. At this level, corruption is no longer just a financial act. It becomes a diplomatic issue, a national security issue, a strategic inconvenience, and that is where accountability often dies. World leaders do not stand alone. They sit inside alliances, trade agreements, military partnerships, and economic dependencies. When allegations surface, investigations don't just threaten one person, they threaten relationships between governments, deals worth billions, arms contracts, energy supplies, intelligence cooperation. Suddenly, chasing stolen money is no longer about justice. It becomes complicated. And in that complexity, truth suffocates. Diplomatic immunity, sovereign status, classified protections, all tools originally meant for stability become barriers against accountability. Warrants are delayed. Extraditions are denied. Evidence requests vanish into bureaucratic black holes. Prosecutors stall. Courts lose momentum, and the clock does the rest. Meanwhile, threats operate in the dark. Whistleblowers are silenced. Journalists are pressured. Investigators are warned to be careful. Careers end quietly. Funding dries up. Stories disappear from the headlines, not through open censorship, but through fear, lawsuits, and carefully timed character assassinations. At the public level, people see a scandal. They see hearings. They hear fiery speeches. They believe action is coming. But behind closed doors, negotiations begin. Settlements are discussed. Channels reopen. And slowly, quietly, the system resets. No handcuffs, no trials, no prison. The most dangerous immunity is not written into law. It is written into power itself. Leaders know that if they fall too hard, they can destabilize entire regions. That fear alone becomes their armor. They are not protected because they are innocent. They are protected because they are useful. And offshore wealth strengthens that armor. When your money is untouchable, your future becomes portable. You are no longer attached to any single country. If pressure rises here, you move there. If allies fall, you buy new ones. This is how corruption spreads upward instead of being cut down. The higher someone climbs, the harder it becomes to reach them. And by the time they are truly exposed, they are often already gone, retired, relocated, or shielded by time. For ordinary citizens, justice feels slow. For the powerful, it feels optional. And that difference changes everything. The truth didn't come from courts. It came from data. For years, investigators chased whispers. Journalists followed fragments. Prosecutors pushed paper through locked doors, and nothing truly moved. Then suddenly millions of hidden documents spilled into the light at once. Balance sheets, email trails, shell company registries, private contracts never meant to be seen. In a single moment, the invisible world of offshore finance became visible. It felt like an earthquake. Names appeared: politicians, royalty, business tycoons, generals, families hidden behind flags and titles. Entire networks of shell companies were mapped. Money trails stretched across continents. What was once denied now sat in black and white. The public finally saw proof that global leaders were not just benefiting from the system, they were inside it. For a moment, the world stopped. Newsrooms worked around the clock. Headlines exploded. Governments promised investigations. People waited for arrests, for resignations, for justice. And then, the silence returned. Some officials stepped down. A few careers ended. But the system itself absorbed the shock. Files were sealed. Jurisdictions refused cooperation. Legal teams mobilized faster than prosecutors, and soon the same pattern repeated: outrage upstairs, protection downstairs. Worse still, many of the people exposed simply disappeared from the public conversation. Their assets stayed offshore. Their wealth stayed intact. Their influence resurfaced quietly through proxies, businesses, and political allies. The leak embarrassed them. It did not dismantle them. For whistleblowers, the cost was immediate and brutal: exile, prison, fear. Lives reduced to shadows for revealing truths the world demanded to know, and then struggled to protect. This is the cruel paradox of transparency in a world built on secrecy. When the truth is finally exposed, the public expects justice. But justice still depends on the same institutions that allowed the secrecy to exist in the first place. And when those institutions hesitate, power wins by default. The leaks proved what many suspected. Offshore empires were not theories. They were not rumors. They were operational, massive, and still active. What shocked the world was not just how much money was hidden, but how calmly the system survived exposure. Because while documents can reveal theft, they cannot force accountability. And as long as the shields remain intact, even the loudest revelations fade into history, while the money continues to move. Every hidden fortune has a victim on the other end. When billions disappear into offshore accounts, they do not vanish from nowhere. They come from public budgets, from national reserves, from foreign aid, from natural resources that were supposed to lift entire populations out of poverty. The money that ends up decorating private accounts begins its life as something meant for everyone. In one country, it is healthcare funding that never reaches hospitals. In another, it is disaster relief that evaporates before food and medicine arrive. In another, it is education budgets that leave classrooms without teachers, without books, without light. On balance sheets, these are just missing numbers. On the ground, they are missing lives. Corruption at this level does not announce itself with violence. It kills slowly, quietly, through underfunded systems and delayed responses, through unsafe roads that were never repaired, through power grids that fail in heat waves, through water systems that poison entire communities while officials drink bottled water bought with stolen funds. The distance created by offshore systems is intentional. Once the money crosses borders, the suffering becomes abstract, a line in a report. A statistic in a briefing: the thief never sees the face of the child who didn't receive treatment, the family displaced by floods, the workers unpaid after public projects stall. The cruelty of the system is that it removes the human consequence from the human decision. And it is not only poor nations that bleed. Wealthy countries lose too, through tax evasion, through financial manipulation, through rigged corporate structures that shift profits away from where work is actually done. The pressure created by missing revenue is passed downward. Higher taxes, reduced services, narrower safety nets. The public pays twice, first through theft and then through cuts. Offshore empires create a world where money flows upward and responsibility flows downward. The people at the bottom carry the weight. The people at the top carry the protection. What makes this cycle so destructive is that it feeds on itself. As corruption weakens a nation, it becomes easier to steal from it again. Institutions grow hollow, trust collapses, desperation rises, and in that chaos more money is extracted and sent into hiding. To the people losing everything, there is rarely a headline. No document leak, no courtroom drama, just the slow realization that nothing is coming. No rescue, no reform, no accountability, only survival. And as long as stolen wealth remains safely parked offshore, this cycle continues without interruption. The money is protected. The thieves are protected, and the victims are left to absorb the cost in silence. Laws are announced loudly, enforcement disappears quietly. After every major scandal, the same ritual unfolds. World leaders stand at podiums, promises are made, task forces are formed. Summits are held behind closed doors. New regulations are announced with dramatic language about transparency, accountability, and reform. For a brief moment, it feels like the system is finally about to change. But beneath the speeches, the structure remains untouched. The truth is simple and uncomfortable. The same financial powers that profit from offshore secrecy also shape the global rules meant to regulate it. Every reform is negotiated, every loophole is debated, and every crackdown is softened before it ever reaches the people it was supposedly designed to stop. On paper, it looks aggressive: reporting requirements, blacklists, cross-border cooperation, enhanced compliance. But in practice, the most dangerous gaps are left open on purpose. Trusts are exempted. Ownership definitions are weakened. Enforcement budgets are trimmed. Jurisdictions promise transparency tomorrow. And tomorrow never arrives. Why? Because real reform threatens real power. It threatens political donors, multinational corporations, intelligence arrangements, strategic alliances. It threatens the financial arteries that quietly connect governments to the very systems they claim to oppose. So instead of dismantling offshore empires, the system manages outrage. It gives the public just enough punishment to release pressure. A fine here, a resignation there, a symbolic court case that never reaches the top. The illusion of accountability becomes the product. Meanwhile, the money keeps moving. Even when nations agree to share information, the pace is glacial. Bureaucracy becomes a shield. Requests take years. Records arrive incomplete. Jurisdictions cite privacy laws. By the time cooperation materializes, the assets have already been transferred again into newer, deeper layers of protection. This is how corruption learns to adapt. Every exposure teaches it how to hide better. Every reform teaches it where the next loophole will be. And slowly, something more dangerous happens. The public grows tired. Outrage becomes routine. Another scandal becomes just another headline. People stop expecting justice. They stop believing change is possible. That loss of expectation is the most powerful protection of all. Because a system that no one trusts, but no one believes can be changed, is a system that no longer needs to hide. It can stand in the open, disguised as order. Every hidden empire follows the same invisible blueprint. It doesn't begin with theft, it begins with preparation. Before a single dollar is taken, the architecture is already in place. A shell company is registered in one country. A trust is formed in another. A bank account is opened through a third. Control is divided on paper, but unified in reality. By the time the money moves, the maze is already built. Then comes access. A leader gains control over budgets, contracts, natural resources, or foreign aid. The public sees development projects and national priorities. Behind the scenes, carefully selected deals create streams of private extraction disguised as official spending, overpriced infrastructure, inflated defense contracts, fake consulting fees, resource licenses sold far below value. The money begins to bleed quietly. Next is conversion. Stolen funds are transformed into clean revenue through layers of transactions. What started as a bribe becomes a loan. What began as embezzlement becomes an investment. What was once theft becomes a dividend. Each step moves the money farther from its origin and closer to legal protection. Then comes distribution. Wealth is spread across jurisdictions like seeds, some for property, some for businesses, some for political allies, some reserved for exile. No single account holds enough to be obvious. No single connection is strong enough to prove. Even if one branch is exposed, the rest survive. After that comes normalization. Once the system works once, it becomes routine, theft becomes policy, protection becomes expectation. The machinery runs so smoothly that no one inside it sees themselves as corrupt anymore. They see themselves as managers of a system that already existed before them and will exist after them. Finally comes insulation. By the time public anger rises, the assets are frozen behind legal walls. Even a total collapse of power does not mean a collapse of wealth. Regimes fall, governments change, leaders vanish. The money stays exactly where it was designed to stay. This is not chaos, this is design. What makes this blueprint so terrifying is not how effective it is, but how repeatable it is. Once created, it can be copied in any country, any system with weak oversight, any place where power concentrates faster than accountability. The method does not depend on ideology. It works for dictators and Democrats alike. And the last step is always the same: distance. Distance from victims, distance from consequences, distance from the damage left behind. By the time the public demands answers, they are no longer chasing people. They are chasing shadows wrapped in law. And that is how offshore empires stop being hiding places and become permanent escape routes. This is the final truth everything leads to. Tax havens were never an accident. They were not loopholes that slipped through the cracks of the global system. They were built intentionally, step by step, law, by the same powers that stand on stage and promise to fight corruption. The world did not fail to stop offshore empires. It designed them. Behind every hidden fortune is not just a corrupt leader, but a network of protected interests, banks that profit from deposits, law firms that profit from secrecy, corporations that profit from invisibility, and governments that profit from control. The system survives because too many powerful players gain from its existence. This is why exposure alone never kills it. When documents are leaked, the world sees the theft, but what it doesn't always see is the deeper structure that makes that theft safe. The courts are slow by design, the jurisdictions are fragmented by design, the definitions of ownership are blurred by design. The delays are not accidents, they are features. And the pattern is always the same. A leader rises, power concentrates, oversight weakens, the offshore structure is prepared, the extraction begins, public money disappears quietly. Whistleblowers speak. Journalists publish. The public is outraged. Reforms are promised. A few names fall. And then the system resets, untouched at its core. What shocks most people is not that corruption exists. It's that corruption is now institutionalized. It no longer operates at the edges of the financial system. It operates through it. It uses the language of law, the protections of diplomacy, the complexity of global finance. It hides inside words like compliance, privacy, sovereignty, and investment. These words sound neutral. But in practice, they act as shields. This is why stolen money keeps returning to the same islands. Not because those islands are powerful, but because the global order has chosen to make them powerful. And the most unsettling realization of all? The offshore system does not just protect criminals after they steal. It gives them the confidence to steal in the first place. Because when the escape route is guaranteed, the crime becomes inevitable. This is no longer just a story about hidden money. It is a story about a world where justice must ask permission to move, but theft never has to. And once you see this pattern clearly, once you understand that the same actors who publicly condemn corruption privately benefit from the machinery that enables it, you begin to realize something far more dangerous than any single scandal. The system isn't broken. It's working exactly as it was designed to work. What the world calls corruption often looks like chaos from the outside: scandals, leaks, resignations, protests, court cases that drag on for years. But what you've seen in this journey is something far more controlled, a system with rules, with layers, with safeguards built not to protect people, but to protect power. Offshore empires did not rise because a few bad individuals broke the rules. They rose because the rules were written to make hiding easy, to make ownership vague, and to make accountability optional. The money did not simply disappear. It was guided, transferred, converted, and locked behind legal walls so thick that even truth struggles to pass through them. And while the powerful move their wealth across oceans with a few signatures, ordinary people remain trapped inside the consequences: higher taxes, fewer services, broken infrastructure, weakened healthcare, collapsing trust in institutions that promise protection but deliver silence. The distance between ruler and citizen grows wider, not just financially but morally. The most disturbing part is not that the system exists. It's that it has become normal. It has become background noise. Another headline, another name, another promise of reform that fades without changing the foundation. Corruption no longer shocks the world. It exhausts it. But exhaustion is exactly what this system depends on. Because a tired public is easier to control than an angry one. And a distracted society is far less dangerous than an informed one. What you've witnessed is not a conspiracy hidden in the dark. It is a network operating in plain sight, protected by complexity, defended by influence, and sustained by global silence. And as long as that silence remains more powerful than accountability, the offshore world will continue to thrive, quietly, efficiently, and without remorse. In the end, the islands were never the secret. The real secrecy lived in contracts signed behind closed doors, in laws written with invisible ink, and in systems so complex they were never meant to be understood by the people they affect most. The beaches and resorts were only the surface. Beneath them lived a machinery of quiet extraction that turned public wealth into private escape routes. History will remember speeches about fighting corruption. It will remember the promises, the reforms, the summits, the handshakes. But history will also remember something else, the moment when the world had enough information to see how the system truly worked, yet not enough courage to dismantle it. And that is how corruption survives for generations. Not through force alone, but through permission. In the end, the islands were never the secret. The real secrecy lived in contracts signed behind closed doors, in laws written with invisible ink, and in systems so complex they were never meant to be understood by the people they affect most. The beaches and resorts were only the surface. Beneath them lived a machinery of quiet extraction that turned public wealth into private escape routes. History will remember speeches about fighting corruption. It will remember the promises, the reforms, the summits, the handshakes. But history will also remember something else, the moment when the world had enough information to see how the system truly worked, yet not enough courage to dismantle it. And that is how corruption survives for generations. Not through force alone, but through permission. If this story made you pause, question, or feel uneasy, then don't let that feeling fade with the video. Share this with someone who still believes corruption only happens far away. Leave a comment with your thoughts. Do you think this system can ever truly be dismantled, or is it too deeply protected? And stay connected with Corruption Rewind, because this investigation doesn't end here. There are more hidden systems to expose, and more truths waiting to be uncovered.